grey wolf. But also, the main difference is how they hunt, because rather than hunting in packs, because although Ethiopian wolves do live in groups, they hunt on their own. And of course, also they hunt using stealth and lightning-quick reactions, because where they live in places like the Bale Mountains, there's nothing up there like an elk or a moose or a bison that needs to be brought down by the whole pack working together. And a lot of what they feed on are rodents like giant mole rats right here. But of course, over the last few decades, these wolves have been under tremendous pressure. They've suffered from hunting, habitat loss, and most recently from disease, which has made them now the most threatened member of the dog family. And there's probably now less than 500 individuals left in the wild, so they are teetering on the edge. Because a few years ago, Ethiopian wolves were blamed for livestock predation and were persecuted by local people, but that has since been stopped because it was proven the wolves were not responsible. But the main reason this wolf is so rare is due to habitat loss, because Ethiopia's human population has been expanding at a rapid rate. And now all those people need more space to live and to grow their food. And as humans take over the land for farming, that's leaving less and less space for the wolves to live and raise their pups. And a lot of them are being pushed into the highest mountain ranges of Ethiopia, which is meaning a lot of them are being forced to inbreed, which is causing a lot of genetic problems and health disorders. But sadly, this wolf is not just threatened by the loss of its habitat. In fact, because people in Ethiopia, like many people around the world, keep dogs, and unfortunately, pet dogs in Ethiopia have one of the highest rates of rabies in the world, a disease that affects all members of the canine family and unfortunately is fatal. And the wolves easily catch rabies when they come into contact with pet or stray dogs. And also, stray dogs are even starting to breed with Ethiopian wolves, which is kind of messing up the gene pool a little. But there are people doing something about it, because there is hope, like vaccinations being given to the local dogs to prevent the spread of rabies to the Ethiopian wolves, and there are efforts gradually being made to preserve the habitat they live in, as well as teaching local people that they can coexist with these animals. So hopefully in 50 years' time, this population could increase to maybe 1,000 or so from 500. Fingers crossed. And here is their range. Of course, this is where they live in Ethiopia. Now, the next wolves I'm going to show you are the most northern members of the dog family. They are the Arctic wolf. Arctic wolves are, as their name suggests, found in the Arctic. I mean, like in northern Canada and Alaska, as well as northern Europe and Russia. They are a subspecies of grey wolf, but as you can see, they have smaller ears and tails and are smaller in stature to a grey wolf, but also their fur is pure white. These wolves live in the Arctic, and of course life in the Arctic is very, very hard for them, because a lot of food is scarce, and a lot of the time, because they usually live in packs of about 15 animals, but quite often they have to hunt on their own, and their lives are increasingly hard because many wolves don't live beyond 7 years, and about 75% of pups die before they reach their first year. But there is actually a remote corner of the planet on Ellesmere Island in the Canadian Arctic where, incredibly, the wolves there have no fear of man. And that's mainly down to the fact that many of the wolves on Ellesmere Island have never seen a human being before, but also they've never been hunted. So they are very inquisitive and very curious, but that quite often can lead them to be dangerous. But even so, the wolves on Ellesmere Island have actually shown that this is probably how wolves became the domestic dogs that we have today. And of course, probably the biggest prey that Arctic wolves hunt are musk oxen and caribou. Of course, the Arctic wolves feed on all kinds of things. I mean, they mostly feed on lemmings, small furry rodents, as well as Arctic hares, ground nesting birds. But the biggest prey they catch are caribou and musk oxen. Now, musk oxen are bovids or bovine animals, which means they're in the cow family. And if your idea of a cow is a slow-moving, dopey, friendly freeloader chewing the cud, you really could not be more wrong. Because this is a group of animals that contains things like the water buffalo, the Cape buffalo, the American bison, and the musk oxen themselves. And musk oxen are probably the most heavily defended animals in the Arctic because they have notoriously bad tempers. They are built like tanks. They can go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 5 seconds, and they have a skull like a sledgehammer. And of course, musk oxen are also survivors of the ice ages, so they evolved around animals that are long extinct, like the mammoths, the mastodons, the woolly rhinos, but also they evolved around predators like dire wolves or saber-toothed cats. And of course, in a flat-out charge, a musk oxen could snap a wolf's spine, or they could use their horns here to gouge and gore a wolf. Of course, the wolves in the Arctic islands, like Ellesmere, because they've spent millennia hunting musk oxen. And of course, quite often, what they do is they separate one, usually a young calf or an elderly member of the herd, and then they will all pile in to finish it off. Of course, wolves that hunt caribou, for instance, because their lives are even more challenging because the caribou make the longest land migration of any mammal. And of course they only pass through the wolves' territories for a few weeks, and so, but quite often wolves have to hunt them alone. And what the wolves will do is they will panic the herd to separate a calf from its mother or a old, weak or sick individual, and of course they always have to get their prey by the throat to finish it off. Of course, if they miss the migration, the wolves pay dearly for it, as starving wolves have even been known to eat their own pups. But even so, this animal is not endangered at all. In fact, there are thousands, if not millions of them in the Arctic Circle. Of course, like the grey wolf, people can rarely see them as they're very shy and very elusive. But the wolves on places like Ellesmere Island, they have no fear of man because they have never been hunted by humans, and a lot of them have never seen us before. So these are still some of the most beautiful creatures I've ever studied. Of course, here is their range. Of course, along here is where the caribou made their migration. Right here is Ellesmere Island. And That there is where the wolves have no fear of human beings. Now the next wolf I'm going to show you is probably the most unusual member of the dog family. It is the maned wolf. Now, maned wolves are very, very unusual. I mean, for one thing, they are the tallest of the dog family. I mean, they almost look like someone's just taken a red fox and stretched it. But that's not what's so peculiar about them. I mean, it's mainly their diet, and of course, I mean, a vast amount of their diet is made up of fruit, and these are the less choosy of the wolves in what they eat, because quite often what they feed on, in fact about 60% of their diet is made up of fruit. But also they will, as you can see here, hunt mammals. In fact, they mostly feed on small mammals like rodents by using their large satellite dish ears to detect the tiny rustlings in grass and then leap and pounce on them. But they will also feed on unattended eggs, of course. But the most unusual thing about the maned wolf is that, unlike other wolves that live in packs, maned wolves live on their own and they will defend a territory of up to 150 square kilometres. And of course, how they got their name, the maned wolf, is down to that dark area of fur along the nape of the neck and the shoulders, and that can quite often be used to either attract a mate or even to make it look big and intimidating, and that can usually be used to drive off either a rival maned wolf or even potentially a potential predator like a jaguar or a puma. Of course, around dusk time and midnight are when the maned wolves are most active, because they will go out and look for food, and they usually feed on things like fruit, unattended bird and reptile eggs, but also small mammals like rodents and even rabbits and maybe even monkeys that come down from the trees. But of course, probably the best place to see these wolves is in Brazil, and it's the monastery of Caraça, which is in these two images here. Because around about 20 odd years ago, the monks there realised that a large predator, was going through their garbage, and they worked out that it was, in fact, the maned wolves. And they have since then been putting out food for them, so what they do is they leave a big plate of meat right at the steps of the monastery, and the wolves can pick up the scent of that from miles away, and they will quite often come in for a free feed. And that is said to be the best place in the world to see them. And of course, quite often the wolves are so preoccupied with the food that they pretty much just ignore you. Of course, it is very hard to see maned wolves in the wild because they're not only shy and solitary and elusive, but they're also endangered because they've lost vast amounts of their habitat to agriculture, but also they've occasionally been hunted out of fear for livestock predation, when they don't actually feed on large mammals. But even so, this is an opportunist, omnivore, and the long-legged loner of the savannas, and the maned wolf to this day remains one of the strangest members of the dog family. This is their range. Now, the next and last wolves I'm going to show you are some of the rarest in the world. They are the red wolves. Now, red wolves are closely related to grey wolves, but they're slightly smaller, and as you can see, with rusty red fur rather than grey. Of course, they were once the top dogs in the southern states of North America and into Mexico, but Unfortunately, by the 1980s, they were declared extinct in the